A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. I ain't saying nothin'. Just don't send me back. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless, whipping dust into every crevice of Silas's remote homestead. He had sought this isolation, built his cabin plank by plank, each deliberate movement a testament to his desire for solitude. His broad shoulders, weathered by sun and biting wind, carried a weight heavier than any timber beam. He was a man of few words, his silence a shroud woven from guilt and an old grief. His eyes, tired eyes that had seen everything, often stared out at the dusty vastness, finding a bleak comfort in its emptiness. He chopped wood deep into the night, as if splitting his guilt into pieces, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing the dull ache in his own chest. His life was routine, stark and unyielding. Rising with the pale winter sun, tending to his small garden, mending fences, and disappearing into the silence as twilight descended. The nearest town, a cluster of worn-down buildings and bitter faces, was a day's ride, a place he avoided save for absolute necessity. This day, however, necessity called. A plow blade needed repair, a few sacks of flour were low. He mounted his solid horse, the creak of the saddle leather the only sound in the pre-dawn quiet, and set off, leaving his haven of quiet desolation. He didn't know it yet, but his first true home was right in front of him, though it appeared in a form he could never have anticipated. The air grew colder as he neared town, frost clinging to the sparse sagebrush. He pulled his heavy coat tighter around his massive frame. The chill seeped into Alara's bones, clinging like a shroud. She stood shivering in the biting wind, her threadbare shawl offering little protection against the morning's cruel bite. Her child, a small girl named Lily, clung tightly to her worn dress, her face pale, her lips trembling. They had arrived in this desolate town with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the stark, raw reality of their desperation. A sign in front of the saloon, half obscured by dust, promised auction. Miscellaneous, property and sundry goods. Alara didn't understand the full implications, but the grim faces of the men gathered around the makeshift stage whispered a dark truth. She lowered her gaze, her dignity a fragile shield against the stares. She was chattel, a broken woman, a burden in the eyes of this harsh world. Her eyes, though, held a quiet, steady resolve, dulled but not extinguished by suffering. Silas rode into the town square, the clinking of his horse's bit on tin harness the only sound to break his own reverie. He dismounted, his boots kicking up dust, and headed towards the blacksmith, his usual path. Then he saw her, standing apart from the small, mocking crowd, coatless, a child clutching her. A memory flickered, sharp and sudden, of a smaller, similar figure, lost to him long ago. He froze. His usual path forgotten, he hesitated. The auctioneer, Barnaby Finch, a man with a greedy glint in his eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth, began his spiel. Here we have a fine piece of property. Strong hands, no complaints. Comes with a little one, though laughter rippled through the onlookers. Alara flinched, pulling Lily closer. Silas's gaze, usually averted from human misery, fixed on the trembling mother and child. Without a word, against every instinct for self-preservation, he unfastened his heavy, broad-shouldered coat, its wool thick and warm. He moved deliberately, his steps silent in the dust, until he stood before her. He silently placed his coat around her weary shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, smelling of wood smoke and earth. She shivered, from suspicion as much as cold, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment, wary and alert. He did not speak. Then, a low, guttural voice from deep within his chest, surprising even himself. "How much?" The crowd hushed. Finch smirked. $50. For the pair. Silas pulled a leather pouch from his belt, the clink of coins stark in the sudden quiet. He counted out the money, his movements slow and steady. Done, the word hung in the dusty air, heavy and final. Alara watched, bewildered. Then her eyes found his again, not with gratitude, but a cautious fear. Something had changed. He had acted impulsively, his guilt driving him, compelling him to make a public declaration. He had bought them. Silence settled between them like the dust of the plains. Silas had brought them back to his isolated homestead, a small wagon bumping over the uneven ground. The child, Lily, asleep, nestled under the warmth of his coat. Alara sat stiffly beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, wary, alert, saying nothing. He said nothing either, his face a rigid mask. He led them into his cabin, a single room dominated by a massive stone fireplace and a worn cot. He gestured to the cot. "You'll sleep here," his voice was rough, unaccustomed to speaking more than a few words a day. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement, clutching Lily tighter. No words, just the unspoken weight of their new, strange arrangement. Daily routine became their shared language, a careful dance of avoidance and unspoken needs. He would leave before dawn, tending to his tasks, returning as the slate evening sky began to dim. Alara, with her quiet strength, cleaned the cabin, cooked the meager meals, her movements economical and uncomplaining. She used the old, chipped tin cup he offered, ate the simple stew he shared, never asking for more. She was a ghost in his home, her presence felt, but not directly acknowledged. He watched her from the corner of his eye, seeing the quiet dignity in her every action, the way she cared for Lily, the way her hand, worn down but not broken, would smooth the child's hair. He saw the tremor in her hands sometimes, the brief flash of exhaustion in her eyes. He wanted to speak, to ask, but the words caught in his throat, held captive by years of self-imposed silence and the heavy burden of his past. He kept his distance, afraid of unsettling the fragile peace, afraid of the connection that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to weave itself around them. She responded to his presence with suspicion at first, flinching at sudden movements, but as days turned into weeks, her fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious acceptance. Her silence was not shattered, but softened. He would bring in firewood, leaving it neatly stacked by the stove. She would light the smoky lamp as dusk fell, its pale glow filling the small room. He would mend a loose floorboard. She would fold his worn blankets. They were two separate stars in a shared night sky, orbiting each other, not yet colliding, but no longer drifting apart. The silent agreement was that she would stay. She stayed. He began to help, secretly, cautiously, as if afraid of scaring a wild creature. One cold morning, he saw her shivering as she tried to start a fire in the damp wood. Later that day, a stack of perfectly dry, split kindling appeared by the stove, seemingly out of nowhere. She looked at it, then at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her tired eyes. He remained silent, picking up his shovel, heading outside. Another time, he noticed her shoes were worn thin, barely more than rags against the rocky ground. A few days later, a pair of sturdy, practical leather shoes, still smelling faintly of the tannery, were left outside the cabin door, tied with a simple string. She found them, her fingers tracing the honest stitching. She looked up, but he was already moving, tending to the fence posts, his back to her, broad-shouldered and unyielding. She wore them. He saw it. A quiet satisfaction, a small, unfamiliar warmth, began to thrum beneath his rigid exterior. He would deliberately leave food out. A handful of dried berries, a piece of freshly baked bread he rarely made for himself, and watch from a distance as she found it, her movements slow, deliberate, accepting. Lily, less burdened by the unspoken history, was quicker to respond. She would sometimes approach him as he worked, her small hand reaching out tentatively to touch the worn fabric of his trousers. He would freeze, then slowly, carefully, reach down and offer her a smooth, interesting rock he'd found or a feather. The child's soft laughter was a sound so rare on his homestead. It felt like a miracle, a tiny seed of joy pushing through barren ground. Alara watched these interactions, her suspicions slowly softening, transforming into a fragile hope. He still said little, his nature rooted deep in reclusiveness, but his actions spoke volumes, quiet gestures of protection and unspoken care. He was a solid presence, a heavy, reassuring anchor in their uncertain lives. He never looked at her directly for long, but his presence was a constant, unyielding comfort. A storm descended upon the plains with a sudden, brutal force, trapping them inside the small cabin. The biting wind howled like a distant beast, rattling the wooden door and sending shivers down their spines. The pale winter sun vanished, replaced by a deep fog and a sky the color of bruised slate. Outside, the world was a blur of white, the air thick with snow and freezing rain. Inside, the smoky lamp cast long, dancing shadows, making the already small cabin feel even more intimate, more isolated. It was during this storm that Lily fell ill. Her small body, already fragile from hardship, grew hot with fever. She coughed, a dry, rattling sound that tore at Alara's heart. Fear, raw and immediate, seized Alara. She held Lily close, rocking her gently, whispering soft words of comfort, but the child's breathing grew shallow. Silas, who had been sitting by the stove, his back to them, turned. He saw the terror in Alara's eyes, the rapid rise and fall of Lily's chest. He moved without a word, his movements deliberate, efficient. He pulled out a small, leather-bound book of old remedies, one his own mother had kept. He brewed a strong, bitter tea from dried herbs, the aroma filling the small room. He pressed a cool, damp cloth to Lily's forehead, his massive hand surprisingly gentle. Alara watched him, her initial suspicion momentarily forgotten in the face of shared vulnerability. As the hours passed, Silas remained by the cot, a silent sentinel. He changed the cloths, offered sips of the tea, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the midst of the crisis. At one point, Lily cried out in her sleep, and Alara, exhausted, began to weep, quiet, suppressed sobs. Silas reached out, his hand hovering for a moment. Then he gently placed it on Alara's weary shoulder. The touch was light, tentative, yet it broke something open within her. She leaned into his touch, seeking comfort, and for the first time, truly felt his silent strength, his unspoken promise to endure. The storm outside raged, but inside, a fragile bond, nurtured by shared fear and quiet compassion, began to solidify. Misunderstanding and caution gave way to a nascent trust. The storm, though fierce, eventually passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow and a profound quiet that settled over the homestead. Lily, pale but recovering, began to stir, her small breaths easing Alara's constant vigil. The shared ordeal had stripped away the layers of unspoken reserve, leaving them raw, exposed, yet strangely closer. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, the cabin lit only by the flickering light of the stove, Alara spoke. Her voice was soft, trembling, almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "My husband, he left us, sold everything. Left us with nothing." She paused, swallowing, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "The man who bought me at the auction, he was the one who claimed I owed him money. Said he owned me. I ran." With Lily, her voice broke, small and shattered. "I didn't want to be property." "Not again." Silas listened, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his gaze fixed on the dying embers. He didn't interrupt, didn't turn, just absorbed her words. Then, a low, guttural sound, deep in his chest. "My wife and son. Lost them to the fever. Years ago." He paused, the words heavy, unaccustomed. "Buried them on the hill, overlooking the valley." He pointed vaguely towards the window, a dark silhouette against the deepening night. "That's why I came here. To be alone." His voice was rough, raw, filled with years of pain. "That's why I bought you. Not to own. To protect. To keep you from that kind of man. To keep you safe." He finally turned, his tired eyes meeting hers, a silent plea for understanding in their depths. A wave of comprehension washed over Alara. The suspicion, the fear, the misunderstanding that had clouded their days dissipated like mist in the morning sun. His act of intervention, once perceived as a simple transaction, now revealed itself as a profound act of quiet remorse, a protective instinct born of his own devastating loss. Her hand, gentle and unsteady, reached out, finding his arm. It was a fleeting touch, but it spoke volumes. No longer alone, they shared their burdens, their unspoken griefs, their quiet dignities. For the first time, a true connection, fragile yet real, sparked between them, glowing in the dim light of the cabin. The quiet understanding forged in the cabin was tested brutally when Barnaby Finch rode into the homestead. The land baron, a man with a sneering mouth and a history of exploiting the vulnerable, had heard whispers of Alara's presence. He sought to reassert his claim, to humiliate, to remind everyone that some people were merely property. He rode up to the cabin on a massive horse, kicking up dust, two grim-faced men riding behind him. Well, if it ain't the runaway, come to fetch my property back, Silas. And the little one too. His voice was loud, mocking, designed to shatter the fragile peace of the homestead. Alara froze, her face draining of color. She had been outside, hanging laundry, Lily playing quietly nearby. Her eyes darted to Silas, who had emerged from the barn, a shovel in his hand. Finch dismounted, advancing towards Alara, his boots crunching on the dusty ground. Thought you could hide out here, did you? Thought you were free. He gestured dismissively at her. She lowered her gaze, her dignity a shield against his cruel words, but her body tensed, ready to flee. Lily, sensing the danger, clung tightly to Alara's legs, her small face buried in her mother's skirt. Finch laughed, a harsh, grating sound. She's just a woman, Silas. Easy to break. Easy to forget. Silas dropped the shovel, the clang of metal on earth loud in the sudden silence. He stepped forward, silent but firm, placing himself between Finch and Alara, his broad shoulders a wall of defiance. His gaze, usually averted, fixed on Finch, cold and unwavering. She's with me, Silas said, his voice low, gravelly, but resonant with an undeniable power. Not bought. Chosen, the words hung in the air, a shocking declaration from a man known for his silence. Finch faltered, taken aback by the stoic man's unexpected defiance. The two grim-faced men shifted nervously. The crowd, an unseen presence of quiet, watchful nature, seemed to hold its breath. Finch stammered, then tried to regain his composure. You can't just... Silas cut him off, his voice rising, gaining a quiet authority. This is my land, my home, and she is my family. His words, unadorned and honest, carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken truths. The challenge was clear, unmistakable. The threat in Silas's eyes was more potent than any shouted curse. Finch, surprised by the sudden, unyielding strength of the silent man, hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, backed away. He mounted his horse, his face twisted in a sneer of defeat. This ain't over, he snarled, but his words lacked conviction. He turned and rode off, his men following, leaving only a cloud of dust and the lingering echo of his malice. Alara, watching him go, felt tears welling in her eyes, tears of relief, of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. She looked at Silas, her eyes shining. He had stood protectively in front of her, his silence broken by a powerful declaration. He stayed. The dust settled, and with it, a new era began on the homestead. The public humiliation and Silas's unwavering protection had solidified their bond, transforming it from a fragile understanding into an unbreakable alliance. They moved with a newfound ease around each other, a silent rhythm that spoke of deep, abiding trust. They were strong together, each complementing the other's quiet strengths. Silas, still a man of few words, found small ways to express his growing affection. He would leave a wild flower on the wooden door for Alara to find, or carve a small, intricate bird from a piece of wood for Lily. Alara, in turn, filled the cabin with quiet warmth, mending his clothes, singing soft lullabies to Lily, her voice a gentle balm in the stark wilderness. Their days were filled with the familiar routines of homestead life, tending to the small garden, gathering firewood, mending the cabin. But now, these tasks were shared, each movement imbued with a quiet purpose, a shared future. He would watch her, unobtrusively, as she worked, seeing the unyielding strength in her tired eyes, the quiet dignity in her every gesture. She would catch his gaze sometimes, and in his solid, weathered face, she saw not just protection, but a growing, tender affection. The barren plain, once a symbol of his isolation, slowly began to transform into a landscape of shared dreams. They began to plan, cautiously, for a future together. A small plot of land cleared for a larger garden, a new roof on the small lean-to, a stronger fence against the wild. These were not just chores. They were acts of commitment, threads weaving the fabric of their lives into a single, cohesive whole. The cabin, once a place of stark solitude, now held the soft murmur of Lily's laughter, the quiet hum of Alara's presence, and the unspoken language of two souls finding their way home. They knew, without a single word needing to be spoken, that they had found something rare and precious in the vast, indifferent world. As winter truly passed, shedding its icy grip, their homestead thrived. The pale winter sun gave way to a warmer, more vibrant light, illuminating the green shoots pushing through the earth. The garden flourished under Alara's careful hand, a patch of vibrant life against the dusty vastness. Silas's fields, once barely yielding, now promised a bountiful harvest. The cabin, no longer just a shelter, felt like a true home, filled with the comforting smells of baking bread and wood smoke. Lily, growing stronger and more confident each day, explored the surrounding land, her laughter echoing through the trees. She would often drag Silas by his calloused hand to show him a particularly interesting rock or a small, blooming flower. He would crouch down, his massive frame surprisingly gentle, and listen to her excited chatter, a soft, rare smile touching his lips. Alara watched them, her heart full, the raw wounds of her past slowly, surely, healing. She was no longer just a survivor. She was home. They built a small, sturdy corral for a new horse, Silas teaching Alara the rhythms of the land, the subtle signs of changing weather. She taught him the old, forgotten songs her grandmother used to sing, their melodies weaving through the evening air, a stark contrast to the silence he had once cherished. Their love, born of shared suffering and quiet kindness, was not a fiery passion but a deep, steady warmth, like the coals in the stove that held their heat through the coldest nights. It was built on respect, on dignity, and on the unspoken understanding that they had both found sanctuary in each other's quiet presence. The harsh life circumstances that had brought them together now seemed like distant memories, softened by the daily acts of love and endurance. They were a family, not by blood, but by choice, by the quiet miracle of two broken souls mending each other. Love grows where no one looks, not in grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the shared silences, and the subtle acts of profound kindness. It blooms in the harsh soil of hardship, watered by tears and tended by enduring spirits. It is found not where wealth glitters, but where dignity persists, where a tired hand reaches out to a weary shoulder, and where the promise of safety is stronger than any spoken vow. This is the truth of the silent man and the resilient woman, a truth often overlooked in a world too loud and too quick to judge. Their story reminds us that true strength lies not in outward displays of power, but in the steadfast courage of the heart, in the unyielding determination to build a home where only desolation once reigned. It reminds us that humanity's deepest connections are forged in the crucible of shared vulnerability and quiet compassion, a bond that transcends words and superficial appearances. A home is not built of wood and stone alone, but of trust, of forgiveness, and of the tender, growing love between souls who once believed themselves beyond repair. In the small cabin, a new, meticulously carved wooden rocker sat by the window, a gift from Silas to Alara, painstakingly crafted over long winter nights. Its smooth wood gleamed in the light, a symbol of permanence, of enduring care. Alara would sit in it, Lily nestled in her lap, and read from an old, worn book, her voice soft, calm, filling the quiet space. The window, once shuttered against the world, was now open, letting in the gentle breeze, the scent of blooming sage, and the distant howl of the wind, a sound no longer harsh, but simply part of the world outside their haven. Sometimes, Silas would stand in the doorway, watching them, his presence a comforting weight. He had found his redemption not in erasing the past, but in building a future, in providing a haven, in the quiet, unyielding act of choosing to protect and to love. He had been a man shaped by nature, by pain, but now also by warmth, by the gentle rhythm of a life shared. One evening, as the last rays of dusty sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Alara looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes, tired no longer, but full of light. He did not speak. He did not need to. His gaze held a universe of meaning, a promise. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, and then, his voice a quiet rumble, the most powerful words he had ever spoken. Stay here. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. From suffering, a love that whispered its truth in every quiet moment. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Let it remind you of the quiet power of kindness, the dignity of endurance, and the transformative grace of human connection. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most. We'll see you again, where silence means home.